and welcome back to Story Time with Eric Zimmer. Where we last left off in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, we had just learned who the secret workers were in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, the Oompa Loompas. And now, something serious is about to happen in regards to Augustus Gloop. And we shall start to find out what else happens within the next 4 chapters. You ready? Alright, let's begin. Chapter 17. Augustus Gloop Goes Up the Pipe. When Mr. Wonka turned around and saw what Augustus Gloop was doing, he cried out, "Oh no, please, Augustus, please, I beg of you not to do that. My chocolate must be untouched by human hands." "Augustus," cried out Mrs. Gloop, "didn't you hear what the man said? Come away from that at once." "Away?" Sorry. "This stuff is terrific," said Augustus, taking not the slightest notice of his mother or Mr. Wonka. "Oh boy, I need a bucket to drink it properly." "Augustus," cried Mr. Wonka, hopping up and down, wiggling his stick in the air, "you must come away. You are dirtying my chocolate." "Augustus!" cried Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Gloop. But Augustus was deaf to everything except the call of his enormous stomach. He was now lying full length on the ground with his head far out over the river, lapping up the chocolate like a dog. "Augustus!" shouted Mrs. Gloop, "you'll be giving that nasty cloud of yours to about 1 million people all over the country." "Be careful, Augustus!" shouted Mr. Gloop, "you're leaning too far out." Mr. Gloop was absolutely right, for suddenly there was a shriek and then a splash, and into the river went Augustus Gloop, and in 1 second he had disappeared under the brown surface. "Save him!" screamed Mrs. Gloop, going white in the face and waving her umbrella about. "He'll drown! He can't swim a yard! Save him! Save him!" "Good heavens, woman," said Mr. Gloop, "I'm not diving in there. I've got my best suit on." "And, well, never mind that. That's your own son." Augustus Gloop's face came up again to the surface, painted brown with chocolate. "Help! Help! Help!" he yelled. "Fish me out!" "Don't just stand there, Mrs. Gloop," screamed at Mr. Gloop. "Do something." "I am doing something," said Mr. Gloop, who was now taking off his jacket and getting ready to dive into the chocolate. But while he was doing this, the wretched boy was being sucked closer and closer towards the mouth of one of the great pipes that was dangling down into the river. Then all at once the powerful suction that took hold of him completely, and he was pulled under the surface and then into the mouth of the pipe. The crowd on the river bank waited breathlessly to see where he would come out. "There he goes!" somebody shouted, pointing upwards. And sure enough, because the pipe was made of glass, Augustus Gloop could be clearly seen shooting up inside, head first like a torpedo. "Help! Murder! Police!" screamed Mrs. Gloop. "Augustus, come back at once!" "He can't. What are you doing?" It's a wonder to me," said Mr. Gloop, "how that pipe is big enough for him to go through it." "It isn't big enough," said Charlie Bucket. "Dear, look, he's slowing down." "So he is," said Grandpa Joe. "He's going to stick," said Charlie. "I think he is," said Grandpa Joe. "By golly, he has stuck," said Charlie. "It's his stomach that's done it," said Mr. Gloop. "He's blocked the whole pipe," said Grandpa Joe. "Smash the pipe!" yelled Mrs. Gloop, still waving her umbrella. "Augustus, come out of there at once." "He can't." The watchers below could see the pipe swishing and around the boy see the chocolate swishing around the boy in the pipe, and they could see it building up behind him in a solid mass, pushing against the blockage. The pressure was terrific. Something had to give. Something did give, and that something was Augustus. Woof! Up he shot again like a bullet in the barrel of a gun. "He's disappeared!" yelled Mrs. Gloop. "Where does that pipe go?" Quick, call the fire brigade. Keep calm, said Mr. Walker. Keep down, my dear lady, keep calm. There is no danger. No danger whatsoever. Augustus has gone on a little journey, that's all. A most interesting little journey. But he'll come out of it just fine. You wait and see. How can he possibly come out just fine? Snapped Mrs. Gloop. He'll be made into marshmallows in 5 seconds. Impossible, said Mr. Wonka. Unthinkable. Inconceivable. Absurd. He could never be made into marshmallows. And why not, may I ask? Shouted Mrs. Gloop. Because that pipe doesn't go to the marshmallow room, Mr. Wonka answered. It doesn't go anywhere near it. That pipe, the one Augustus went up, happens to lead directly to the room where I make a most delicious kind of strawberry-flavored chocolate-coated fudge. Then he'll be made into strawberry-flavored chocolate-coated fudge, screamed Mrs. Gloop. My poor Augustus, they'll be selling him by the pound all over the country tomorrow morning. Quite right, said Mr. Gloop. I know I'm right, said Mrs. Gloop. He's beyond a joke, said Mr. Gloop. Mr. Wonka doesn't seem to think so, cried Mrs. Gloop. Just look at him. He's laughing at his head off. How dare you laugh at that like that when my boy's just got up the pipe, you monster! She shrieked, pointing her umbrella at Mr. Wonka as though she was going to run him through. You think it's a joke, do you? You think that sucking my boy up into your bedroom is like that is just one big colossal joke? He'll be perfectly safe, said Mr. Wonka, giggling slightly. He'll be chocolate fudge, shrieked Mrs. Gloop. Never, cried Mr. Wonka. Of course he will, shrieked Mrs. Gloop. I wouldn't allow it, said Mr. Wonka. And why not, shrieked Mrs. Gloop. Because the taste would be terrible, said Mr. Wonka. Just imagine it. Augustus-flavored chocolate-coated Gloop. No one would buy it. They most certainly would, cried Mr. Gloop indignantly. I don't want to think about it, shrieked Mrs. Gloop. Nor do I, said Mr. Wonka, and I do promise you, madam, that your darling boy is perfectly safe. If he is perfectly safe, then where is he? Snapped Mrs. Gloop. Lead me to him this instant. Mr. Wonka turned and clicked his fingers sharply. Click, 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 3 times. Immediately an Oompa Loompa appeared, as if from nowhere, and stood beside him. The Oompa Loompa bowed and smiled, showing beautiful white teeth. His skin was rosy white, his long hair was golden brown, and the top of his head came just above the height of Mr. Wonka's knee. He wore the usual deerskin slung over his shoulder. Now listen to me, said Mr. Wonka, looking down at the tiny man. I want you to take Mr. and Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room and help them find their son, Augustus. He's gone up the pipe. He's just gone up the pipe. The Oompa Loompa took one look at Mrs. Gloop and exploded into peals of laughter. Do be quiet, said Mr. Wonka. Control yourself. Pull yourself together. Mrs. Gloop doesn't think it's at all funny. You can say that again, said Mrs. Gloop. Go straight to the fudge room, Mr. Wonka said to the Oompa Loompa, and when you get there, take a long stick and start poking around inside the big chocolate mixing barrel. I'm almost certain you'll find him in there. But you better look sharp. You'll have to hurry. If you leave him in the chocolate mixing barrel too long, he's liable to get poured into the fudge boiler. And that really would be a disaster, wouldn't it? My fudge would become quite uneatable. Mrs. Gloop let out a shriek of fury. I'm joking, said Mr. Wonka, giggling madly behind his beard. I didn't mean it. Forgive me. I'm so sorry. Goodbye, Mrs. Gloop. And Mr. Gloop. Goodbye. Goodbye. I'll see you later. As Mr. and Mrs. Gloop and their tiny escort hurried away, the 5 Oompa Loompas on the far side of the river suddenly began hopping and dancing about and beating wildly upon a number of very small drums. Augustus Gloop, they chanted. Augustus Gloop. Augustus Gloop. Augustus Gloop. Charlie. Grandpa, cried Charlie. Listen to them, Grandpa. What are they doing? Shh, whispered Grandpa Joe. I think they're going to sing us a song. Augustus... A word of warning. I'm not that good at singing. Augustus Gloop, chanted the Oompa Loompas. Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, the great big greedy nincompoop. How long could we allow this beast to gorge and gustle, feed and feast on everything he wanted to? Great Scott, it simply wouldn't do. However long this pig might have, we're positive he'd never give even the smallest bit of fun or happiness to anyone. So what we do in cases such, and this we use the gentle touch, and carefully we take the brat, and turn him into something that will give us great pleasure to us all. A doll, for instance, or a ball, or marbles, or a rocking horse. But this revolting boy, of course, was so unutterably vile, so greedy, foul, and infantile. He left a most disgusting taste inside our mouths, and so in haste we chose a thing that, come what may, would take the nasty taste away. Come on, we cried, the time is ripe to send him shooting up the pipe. He has to go, it has to be, and very soon he's going to see, inside the room to which he's gone, some funny things are going on. But don't, dear children, be alarmed. Augustus Gloop will not be harmed, although of course we must admit he will be altered quite a bit. He'll be quite changed from what he's been when he goes through the fudge machine. Slowly the wheels go round and round, and cogs begin to grind and pound. 100 knives to slice. We add some sugar, cream, and spice. We boil him for a minute more, until we're absolutely sure that all the greed and all the gale is boiled away for once and all. For then out he comes, and now by grace a miracle has taken place. This boy who only just before was loved by men and from shore to shore. This greedy brute, the louse's ear, is loved by people everywhere. For who could hate or bear a grudge against a luscious bit of fudge? I told you they loved singing, cried Mr. Wonka. Aren't they delightful? Aren't they charming? But you mustn't believe a word they said. It's all nonsense, every bit of it. Are the Oompa Loompas really joking, Grandpa? Asked Charlie. Of course they're joking, answered Grandpa Joe. They must be joking. At least I hope they're joking, don't you? Chapter 18. Down the Chocolate River. Off we go, cried Mr. Wonka. Hurry up, everybody. Follow me to the next route. And please don't worry about Augustus Gloop. He's bound to come out in the wash. They always do. We shall have to make the next part on the journey by boat. Here she comes. Look. A steamy mist was rising up now from the great warm chocolate river, and out of the mist there appeared suddenly a most fantastic pink boat. It was a large open rowboat with a tall front and a tall back, like a Viking boat of old, and it was of such a shining, sparkling, glistening pink color that the whole thing looked as though it were made of bright pink glass. There were many oars on either side of it, and as the boat came closer, the watchers on the riverbank could see that the oars were being pulled by masses of Oompa Loompas, at least 10 of them to each oar. This is my private yacht, cried Mr. Wonka, beaming with pleasure. I made her by hollowing out an enormous boiled sweet. Isn't she beautiful? See how she comes cutting through the river. The gleaming pink boiled sweet boat gilded to the riverbank. 100 Oompa Loompas rested on their oars and stared up at the visitors. Then suddenly, for some reason best known to themselves, they all burst into shrieks of laughter. What's so funny? Asked Violet Beauregard. Oh, don't worry about them, cried Mr. Wonka. They're always laughing. They think everything's a colossal joke. Jump into the boat, all of you. Come on. Hurry up. As soon as everyone was safely in, the Oompa Loompas pushed the boat away from the bank and began to row swiftly down the river. Hey there, Mike TV, shouted Mr. Wonka. Please do not lick the boat with your tongue. It'll only make it sticky. Daddy, said Veruca Salt, I want a boat like this. I want you to buy me a big pink boiled sweet boat exactly like Mr. Wonka's. I want lots of Oompa Loompas to row me about, and I want a chocolate river, and I want... What she wants is a good kick in the pants, whispered Grandpa Joe to Charlie. I couldn't agree with him more. The old man was sitting in the back of the boat, with little Charlie Bucket was right beside him. Charlie was holding tightly onto his grandfather's bony old hand. He was in a whirl of excitement. Everything he had seen so far, the great chocolate river, the waterfall, the huge sucking pipes, the candy meadows, the Oompa Loompas, the beautiful pink boat, and most of all Mr. Willy Wonka himself, he had been so astonished that he began to wonder whether there could possibly be any more astonishments left. Don't worry, there are plenty left. Where would they be going now? What were they going to see? And what in the world was going to happen in the next room? Isn't it marvelous? Said Grandpa Joe, grinning at Charlie. Charlie nodded and smiled up at the old man. Suddenly, Mr. Wonka, who was sitting on Charlie's other side, reached down into the bottom of the boat. He picked up a large mug, dipped into the river, filled it with chocolate, and handed it to Charlie. "Drink this," he said. "It will do you good. You look starved to death." Then Mr. Wonka filled a second mug and gave it to Grandpa Joe. "You too," he said. "You look like a skeleton. What's the matter? Hasn't there been anything to eat in your house lately?" "Not much," said Grandpa Joe. "You have no idea." Charlie put the mug to his lips, and as the rich, warm, creamy chocolate ran down his throat into his empty tummy, his whole body from head to toe began to tingle with pleasure, and a feeling of intense happiness spread over him. "You like it?" asked Mr. Wonka. "Oh, it's wonderful," Charlie said. "The creamiest, loveliest chocolate I've ever tasted," said Grandpa Joe, smacking his lips. "That's because it's been mixed by waterfall," Mr. Wonka told him. The boat sped on down the river. The river was getting narrower. There was some kind of a dark tunnel ahead, a great round tunnel that looked like an enormous pipe. And the river was running right into the tunnel. And so was the boat. "Row on!" shouted Mr. Wonka, jumping up and waving his stick in the air. "Full speed ahead!" And with the Oompa Loompas rowing faster than ever, the boat shot into the pitch-dark tunnel, and all the passengers screamed with excitement. "How can they see where they're going?" shrieked Violet Beauregard in the darkness. "There's no telling where they're going," cried Mr. Wonka, hooting with laughter. "There's no earthly way of knowing which direction they are going. There's no knowing where they're flowing, or which way the river's flowing. Not a speck of light is showing, so the danger must be growing, for the rowers keep on rowing, and they're certainly not showing any signs that they are slowing." "He's got off his rocker!" shouted one of the fathers aghast, and the other parents joined in the chorus of frightened shouting. "He's crazy!" they shouted. "He's balmy, he's nutty, he's screwy, he's batty, he's dippy, he's dotty, he's daffy, he's goofy, he's beany, he's buggy, he's wacky, he's loony." "No, he is not," said Grandpa Joe. "Quite right he is." "Switch on the lights," shouted Mr. Wonka. And suddenly on came the lights, and the whole tunnel was brilliantly lit up, and Charlie could see they were indeed inside a gigantic pipe, and the great upward curving walls of the pipe were pure white and spotlessly clean. The river of chocolate was flowing very fast inside the pipe, and the Oompa Loompas were all rowing like crazy, and the boat was rocketing along at a furious pace. Mr. Wonka was jumping up and down in the back of the boat and calling to the rowers to row faster and faster still. He seemed to love the sensation of whizzing through a white tunnel in a pink boat on a chocolate river, and he clapped his hands and laughed and kept glancing at his passengers to see if they were enjoying it as much as he did. "Look, Grandpa!" cried Charlie. "There's a door in the wall." It was a green door, and it was set into the wall of the tunnel just above the level of the river. As they flashed past it, there was just enough time to read the writing on the door. "Storeroom number 54, it said. "All the creams. Dairy cream, whipped cream, violet cream, coffee cream, pineapple cream, vanilla cream, and hair cream." "Hair cream?" cried Mike TV. "You don't use hair cream." "Row on," shouted Mr. Wonka. "There's no time to answer silly questions." They streaked past a black door. "Storeroom number 71, it said on it. Whips, all shapes and sizes." "Whips!" cried Veruca Salt. "What on earth do you use whips for?" "For whipping cream, of course," said Mr. Wonka. "How can you whip cream without whips? Whipped cream isn't whipped cream at all unless it's been whipped with whips. Just as a poached egg isn't a poached egg unless it's been stolen from the woods in the dead of night. Row on, please." They passed in a yellow door on which it said, "Storeroom number 77. All the beans. Cocoa beans, coffee beans, jelly beans, and has-beans." "Has-beans?" cried Violet Beauregard. "You're one yourself," said Mr. Wonka. "There's no time for arguing. Press on, press on." But 5 seconds later, when a bright red door came into sight ahead, he suddenly waved his gold-topped cane in the air and shouted, "Stop the boat!" Chapter 19. The Inventing Room. Everlasting Gobstoppers and Hair Toffee. When Mr. Wonka shouted, "Stop the boat," the Oompa Loompas jammed their oars into the river and backed to water furiously. The boat stopped. The Oompa Loompas guided the boat alongside the red door. On the door it said, "Inventing Room. Private. Keep out." Mr. Wonka took a key from his pocket, leaned over the side of the boat, and put the key in the keyhole. "This is the most important room in the entire factory," he said. "All my most secret new inventions are cooking and simmering in here. Old Fickle Gruber would give his front teeth to be allowed inside just for 3 minutes. So would Prodnose and Slugworth and all the other rotten chocolate makers. But now listen to me. I want no messing about when you go in. No touching, no meddling, and no tasting. Is that agreed?" "Yes, yes," the children agreed. "We won't touch a thing." "Up till now," Mr. Wonka said, "nobody else, not even an Oompa Loompa, has ever been allowed in here." He opened the door and stepped out of the boat and into the room. The 4 children and their parents all scrambled after them. "Don't touch it!" shouted Mr. Wonka, "and don't knock anything over." Charlie Bucket stared around the gigantic room in which he now found himself. The place was like a witch's kitchen. All about black metal pots and boiling and bubbling on huge stoves, and kettles were hissing, and pans were sizzling, and strange iron machines were clanking and luttering, and there were pipes running all over the ceilings and walls, and the whole place was filled with smoke and steam and delicious, rich smells. Mr. Wonka himself had suddenly become even more excited than usual, and anyone could see that this was the room he loved best of all. He was hopping about among the saucepans and the machines like a child among his Christmas presents, not knowing which thing to look at first. He lifted the lid from a huge pot and took a sniff. Then he rushed over and dipped a finger into a barrel of sticky yellow stuff and had a taste. Then he skipped across to one of the machines and turned half a dozen knobs this way and that. Then he peered anxiously through the glass door of a gigantic oven, rubbing his hands and cackling with delight at what he saw inside. Then he ran over to another machine, a small shiny affair that kept going, "Put, put, 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 put," and every time it went put, a large green marble popped out of it into a basket on the floor. At least it looked like a marble. "Everlasting gobstoppers," cried Mr. Wonka proudly. "They're completely new. I'm inventing them for children who are given very little pocket money. You can put an everlasting gobstopper in your mouth, and you can suck on it, and 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 it will never get any smaller." "It's like gum," cried Beauregard. "It is not like gum," Mr. Wonka said. "Gum is for chewing, and if you tried chewing one of these gobstoppers here, you'd break your teeth off. But they taste terrific, and they change color once a week, and they never get any smaller. They never disappear. Never! At least I don't think they do. There's one of them being tested this very moment in the testing room next door. An Oompa Loompa is sucking on it. He's been sucking on it for nearly a year now without stopping, and it's still just as good as ever." "Now over here," Mr. Wonka went on, skipping excitedly across the room to the opposite wall. "Over here I am inventing a completely new line in toffees." He stopped beside a large saucepan. The saucepan was full of thick, gooey, purplish treacle, boiling and bubbling. By standing on his toes, little Charlie could just see inside it. That's hair toffee," cried Mr. Wonka. "You eat just one tiny bit of that, and in exactly half an hour a brand new, luscious, thick, silky, beautiful crop of hair will start growing out all over the top of your head. And a mustache, and a beard." "Beard?" cried Veruca Salt. "Who wants a beard, for heaven's sake?" "It would suit you very well," said Mr. Wonka. "But fortunately the mixture is not quite right yet. I got it too strong. It works too well. I tried it on an Oompa Loompa yesterday in the testing room, and immediately a huge beard started shooting out of his chin, and the beard grew so fast that soon it was trailing over the floor in a thick, hairy carpet. It was growing faster than we could cut it. In the end we had to use a lawnmower to keep it in check. But I'll get the mixture right soon, and when I do, then there will be no excuse any more for little boys and girls going about with bald heads." "But Mr. Wonka," said Mike TV, "little boys and girls never go about with—" "Don't argue, my dear child. Please don't argue," cried Mr. Wonka. "It's such a waste of precious time. Now over here, if you will all step this way, I will show you something that I am terrifically proud of. Oh, do be careful. Don't knock anything over. Stand back." Chapter 20. The Great Gum Machine. Mr. Wonka led the party over to the gigantic machine that stood in the very center of the inventing room. It was a mountain of gleaming metal that towered high above the children and their parents. Out of the very top of it there sprouted hundreds and hundreds of thin glass tubes, and the glass tubes all curled downwards and came together in a bunch and hung suspended over an enormous round tub as big as a bath. "Here we go!" cried Mr. Wonka, and he pressed 3 different buttons on the side of the machine. A second later, a mighty rumbling sound came from inside it, and the whole machine began to shake most frighteningly, and steam began hissing out of it all over. And then suddenly the watchers noticed that runny stuff was pouring down the sides of all the hundreds of little glass tubes and squirting out into the great tube below. And in every single tube the runny stuff was of a different color, so that all the colors of the rainbow, and many others as well, came sloshing and splashing into the tub. It was a lovely sight, and when the tub was nearly full, Mr. Wonka pressed another button, and immediately the runny stuff stopped running out of the tubes. The rumbling sound disappeared, and a whizzing, whirring noise took its place. And then a giant whizzer started whizzing round inside the enormous tube, mixing up all different colored liquids like an ice cream soda. Gradually, the mixture began to froth. It became frothier, and it turned from blue to white to green to brown to yellow, and back to blue again. "Watch," said Mr. Wonka. Click went the machine, and the whizzers stopped whizzing. And now there came a sort of sucking noise, and very quickly all the blue frothy mixture in the huge basin was sucked back into the stomach of the machine. There was a moment of silence. Then a few queer rumblings were heard. Then silence. Then silence again. Then suddenly the machine let out a monstrous, mighty groan, and at the same moment a tiny drawer, no bigger than a drawer in a slot machine, popped out of the side of the machine, and in the drawer there lay something so small and thin and gray